Hello and welcome back to Crypto. My God, there's been a lot of things going on. We have a very big conference this week in New York City that's got a lot of the suits showing up. It's very TradFi meets crypto, and a lot of interesting things are unfolding. Now, at the same time, the market's in a little bit of disrepair, but there's one thing that underlines a broader success and greater growth around the industry at large, which is stablecoins. And there is two very different approaches to how this stablecoin adoption is happening, one of which I find to be a little scary and dangerous, so let's get into it. Now, the side I don't really love is this idea of a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. However, many countries are beginning to play with the notion, and they're doing all sorts of different takes. Now, the core concept of the CBDC, and I found this actually amazing website by the AtlanticCouncil.org, CBDC Tracker, a CBDC is a virtual money backed and issued by a central bank. As money and payments have become more digital, the world's central banks have realized that they need to provide a public option or let the future of money pass them by. I think that is shrouded in a very considerate idea that if they don't hop on this opportunity, future money will pass them by. And that is really what is occurring as they see the ascent of Bitcoin, of cryptocurrencies. And, they've spent the last decade, Bitcoin's 15 years old now, so more, saying, this is a passing trend. And it's not. And of course, we see the adoption and growth of Apple Pay, Google Pay, tap to pay at the point of sale services. And it has just exploded. Again, my fundamental thesis is that the world is obviously going digital. This is just visible around everything that we touch these days. Look at a car today versus a car from 10 years ago. It's got screens, it's got everything. So why would the money not go digital? And again, this only reinforces itself when we talk about AI agents having access to our world. These digital souls are going to want to move money on digital rails. It doesn't make any sense to fight against this. I think it's such a basic concept that it is becoming overwhelmingly obvious to the world at large. Now, when we look at CBDCs, and again, this site, pretty badass, has a variety of countries. You can point on it, right? And you can see CBDC status for Brazil. It's in pilot, use case, retail, wholesale, architecture, intermediated, infrastructure, digital ledger technology. That's what DLT stands for. So you've got a variety of pilot programs. You have a couple that have launched. And when we go down, we can actually see a lot of really rich information, right? The timeline, race for the future of money. Now, the one thing to understand, CBDCs, unlike Bitcoin, are not trying to invert or replace or reframe the concept of money. They are simply taking the fiat currencies as they exist, issued by the central banks, and putting them in some sort of on-chain format. This reduces fees drastically. This removes any sort of barrier to geography. Cryptocurrency can go anywhere the internet can go. And of course, it's open 24/7, always operational. So this is a pretty fun dashboard. If you want to look more into it, we can see some CBDs in circulation, the Sand Dollar coming out of the Bahamas, the E-Naira from Nigeria, and we have the ECNY, so the digital yuan in China. And just look at that adoption. Of course, they have quite the effective way to force it, but you're looking at 7 trillion yuan versus 0.09 trillion when it came out in 2021. So we can see that pursuit. Now, what really brought this to my attention was the EU coming out and saying, we also are pursuing this CBDC. We want to leverage this format. And that gets to be very scary because the EU is also not very privacy focused. They have been pushing for a lot of things lately, like backdoor access to a lot of privacy formats. And we can see this recently, cornered by the UK's demand for encryption backdoor. Apple turns off its strongest security setting. And that is frustrating, right? Companies like Apple acquiescing and turning off security because the governments demand it. This is how they gain further access into our lives. And again, once there's one backdoor, you open everything for exploits for nefarious actors. This is how the North Koreans get into a lot of value, is through these government back doors. They just become discovered and they don't stay closed. If there's a door, somebody will find a way to open it. Now, going back to the CBDC and coming from the tech champion Stefano Leucci, efforts towards a CBDC grow from all over the world for many reasons. First, the COVID-19 crisis introduced this shift in payment habits towards digital contactless payments and e-commerce. I'm going to call bullshit on that. I do think COVID fully accelerated this, right? People began this fear of physical contact, which is probably a very bad reverberation for our psychology. We need physical contact as humans, but I would argue that Apple Pay and GPay and the just sheer convenience of point of sale makes for digital payments, right? It's not COVID that really pushed us into self-checkout at the grocery stores. It's that self-checkout allows for grocery prices to increase a little bit. They're using the auspices that, some people steal via self-checkout, and that this self-authority comes at a price. It's actually really silly that as technology has moved forward, we have all become our own grocery baggers, and they use that as a method to increase the costs on us. So I'm going to call BS on this, but they're leaning into it. Now, one thing to note about a CBDC is that, again, it is being issued directly from the central banks themselves. What we want to avoid is an authoritarian regime, and we are seeing that coming out of other countries and their CBDCs. Now, a CBDC doesn't necessarily imply that, but there is a lot of reason to believe that they would lean in to authoritarianism over the finance. We've seen with certain formats of these monies that they are able to freeze your access to purchase specific things, maybe plane tickets, train tickets, travel, right? If you can't buy a means out of your local zone, you can't leave. It becomes much more difficult. These could become attached to identity and facial scanning, which means you literally might not be able to open a door. So we are dealing with the physical realities of you might not be able to open a door and exit a building if you get caught with XYZ, all the way to you might not be able to open a door financially, like purchasing a ticket to actually escape and leave. Furthermore, we are seeing certain countries regulate the purchase of sin. So if they think you're buying too much alcohol, that your consumption is high, and they say, we don't really want our populace being drunk. We think it's lazy, blah, blah, blah. And they can come up with any amount of ideology to push this oversight, right? These overreaches of our actual finances. So this is something that is at least listed in the EU CBDC. But again, whenever there's going to be a backdoor, when there's control, it's just about who has control, right? When do they have control? I think we're seeing this in the United States government right now pretty significantly. So they talk about privacy as one of the most important design features, but at the same time, we are seeing things like France pushing forth this very controversial encryption backdoor provision. And encryption is there to protect our privacy all the time. Encryption that only sometimes encrypts never encrypts. It's an all or nothing thing. The data needs to be protected, or it has the opportunity for an exploit. And of course, Murphy's Law says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So if there is a backdoor, it will be opened, things will be exploited. We see this with our social security numbers and any honeypot of information where they collect all of our addresses, our email addresses, our phone numbers. And when one exploit happens on a small company that has all of that KYC data, we are vulnerable to everything else out there moving forward. This is, again, a key thesis behind blockchain, behind zero-knowledge technology, and being able to make those affirmations and confirmations around points of your identifiers, but not your entire identity. We have this push and pull of France obviously trying to push for encryption backdoors, the UK obviously taking a firmer stance, getting Apple to stand down, but at the same time, how can we conflate France's desire for more aggressive control with the EU's statement that the CBDC will have a privacy-centric motivation? I mean, these things are kind of at odds. Now, France did reject this, so kudos to them, but it's being tried. It's always something of concern. Now, on the other side, we've got the US version, and this is Bo Hines today at the major conference in New York City, talking about the future of US dollar dominance is tied to stables. And we are seeing this happen. Stablecoins in the US are just exploding. And the key difference is we are not attaching our central bank to this. The issuance of fiat currencies has to be purchased and acquired and accumulated by private companies. There is a free market dynamic for the issuance of stablecoins. There is competition, and may the best man win. Now, what's become really interesting is that the stablecoin business is just absolutely booming. It generates more revenue than the entire DeFi sector. And you've heard me talk so much about how DeFi has revenue generating capabilities and all this amazing stuff, but goddamn, stablecoins are a shorter lifespan than DeFi. Actually, DeFi gave birth to a lot of stablecoins as people wanted to move in and out of positions on chain without leaving the on-chain environment. But this just goes to show that the US at even a top level is really leaning into this. And again, this is because these stablecoins are really weaponizing the US dollar by giving everyone access to it, and people want that dollar. Now, one thing to look at when we look at the markets broadly, right? We have a market sort of in decline, just assuming crypto assets with Bitcoin being the leading price. Why is it happening? Is it over? Like, how do we judge these kind of things? One thing that you always want to look at is stablecoin issuance. People are not necessarily looking to exit these crypto assets and exit the blockchain. We don't see that so often. What they do is they move from a speculative asset into a stablecoin. Stablecoins also provide tons of liquidity inside of DeFi ecosystems. There's all sorts of incentives for people to utilize these stablecoins to provide more value, which we've seen in like yield farming and things like that, like Barachain, for example. So when we are looking at the health of the markets, I like to look at stablecoins. And here at DeFi Llama, we can see that this stablecoin issuance has gone up quite nicely. We are at now $230 billion on chain. And that is across all the chains. This isn't picking anyone in particular. And realistically, it's either USDC or USDT. So those guys, they can issue onto any chain. Each one of these assets is essentially just a metadata representation. They have a real dollar, they're storing it in the back room, and the dollar that you have on chain is not self-sovereign, it is not permissionless, it is not immutable. If you do something wrong, they can freeze it. However, this is basically a good representation of the amount of wealth that can move back into the crypto markets when the economy feels good, when it feels healthy, when we're in risk on mode again. So this is a great metric if you want to look at it. DeFi Llama does a spectacular job. And now we're seeing the dominance of the USD stablecoin in that Tether was the 7th largest buyer of US treasuries in 2024. This is their business model, right? They take $1, they issue $1 in stablecoins. With those real dollars, they go and they buy treasuries and they earn that yield on top. So all of these dollars being minted on chain are providing these private companies with a very risk-free yield so long as the United States maintains its dominance. So this is a truly amazing format. Tether has taken on an explosive quality in both Africa and Latin America as the de facto dollar that they want to hold their assets in. Again, they live in hyperinflation zones. They can't trust their local currencies. So if you can take that, move it into a dollar and store it all on your cell phone, this is an amazing feat for global stability. And it's really fascinating in that regard. I mean, we have PayPal coming out with their own stablecoin. The juice on this squeeze is so nice that everybody is beginning to compete to realize we want to create our own format. Aave has their own for lending and borrowing called Ghost. But here in PayPal, which makes a lot of sense, PayPal relies on a lot of legacy financial infrastructure. Really, PayPal, when it came out, was just a wrapper, a digital UI wrapper for very complex, silly, traditional finance mechanisms, right? They had figured out how to deal with this shitty financial system that was not made for computers and allow you to interact with it digitally. That was the core of PayPal, and that's what made it such a big company. Now, it's looking at blockchain and saying, hey, the same function that we provide while using all of this crazy outdated tech underneath the hood, well, we could just switch over to blockchain. So they released their own stablecoin, and of course it's going pretty gangbusters. And we can see over the extended lifetime, you have about 2.4 billion minted with just shy of 2 billion burnt. But this is just to show actually their transaction volume. So the minting and the burning is when a token comes into existence or exits existence. So you are seeing at least the volume capacity of over $2 billion, and that money is in motion. The time value of money, the velocity of money, this all gets captured somehow in these digital ecosystems that take advantage of these digital dollars. Now, Dune just came out with a pretty amazing report, the state of stablecoins in 2025, and it's got a variety of really juicy information, so let's run through it. Their first element of the post, February 2025, stablecoins have reached $214 billion in supply. Now, that's a facilitating an astounding 35 trillion in annual transfer volume. And this is when I talk about the velocity of money, right? We're taking 214 billion and we're moving it back and forth so fast that you get to 35 trillion. And that is doubling Visa's annual throughput. So now we're starting to get really competitive with the major money movers of the world. USDT, USDC dominance, I think this one's pretty obvious. They have a huge first mover advantage. But now you're seeing USDC, the more compliant of the two, the one that lives inside the United States versus Tether that's outside the US, has a partnership with Stripe, with MoneyGram. You can see that the legacy players are like, shit, we need to get on chain. Decentralized stablecoins have gained traction. So you've got Athena, which is essentially a stablecoin that is a carry trade wrapped in a token. They're providing yield by playing the markets on both sides. MakerDAO was an early attempt at a decentralized stablecoin, and now really runs a portfolio of a large chunk of real world assets. And that's how they maintain their peg. So all of this is to say that the adoption around stablecoins is growing tremendously. The utility inside the blockchain ecosystem is finding its foothold, and TradFi is becoming very interested. I work alongside a lot of RWA clients, people looking to bring real world assets, whether they be funds, real estate, ownership and equity, and all of those will be underpinned by stables. If you're going to purchase anything, and the goal is to bring everything on chain, that means that we will be looking at basically all money going digital at some point. How do you avoid this? I mean, it's fairly obvious to me that we live in a digital world, and that with this low friction cost of moving money, it is a vastly superior mechanic. Now, all of this comes back to the comparison in the EU's attempt at creating a centralized digital bank currency. And that's a little bit scary because it does step on our privacy. Now, the US version, again, they can lock your assets, they can stop you, but they're not using that government oversight. These are private businesses. They really only care about the movement of money. They're not looking to impede upon your life. Now, one thing I just want to end with is Meredith Whitaker at South by Southwest. She is the CEO of Signal, a peer-to-peer encrypted conversation app. And she is talking about the profound security and privacy issues regarding agentic AI. This is an AI that is inside of our calendars, that is inside of our bank account, that is inside of our comms and our friend channels, right? We want a world where we can outsource a lot of daily mundanity to AI. That means it's going to be getting a lot of our data. And when we look at some of these existing data mining companies that do sell us to AI, they have so much of our information of how we move, what motivates our day-to-day searches, basically an underlying algorithmic representation of our habits that they directly attach to our personalities. And this is what we need to break free of. So all of that is to say, I don't want to see this happening to digital money. I do hope that blockchain and zero knowledge proofs are able to unlock the compliance elements that we need so that we can maintain these digital dollars without having that horrible, scary oversight. I do recommend you take a quick look at Meredith Whitaker's presentation. It's very solid, but we are in this age where the ease of digital is coming in a direct confrontation with privacy, especially the more they want these backdoors. That just means the more data is collected about us and can be exposed to nefarious actors like the North Koreans. At the fundamental level, we've seen the data from 23andMe around Ashkenazi Jews get leaked by bad actors, right? This is getting very scary. What if somebody wants to make a genetically modified virus that only targets a specific group of people? We need to ensure that we separate who we are from what we are and from the identifiers about how we function in the world. And all of this is very relevant to blockchain technology, to zero knowledge proofs, and again, to the foundations of money, which is increasingly becoming stablecoins. So as always, I think, the broader spectrum is that stablecoin growth is happening. And it's my ideals that we can use this technology to actually protect ourselves, to build us closer to a utopia than a dystopia. With that being said, I think the broader markets are looking fairly healthy. That stablecoin growth means that there's capital to come back in when we do have a turning of the tides. I'm hearing to expect that around May-ish time when a lot of the chaos settles down and we can actually create forecasts of what we see in the future. So the attitude right now, if you're in the speculative asset class, is just to survive. The stablecoins are good for us. They keep growing regardless of where we sit right now. And with that being said, y'all, good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow.